Oh, you have to be the last one in the room, don't you?
She's not the last. Is still coming?
Is there anybody in this class that's looking for the basic, intermediate, welcome together?
No.
Okay, thank you.
No.
Joshua, we should have brought the flappers.
But,
So what's interesting is that in my tradition, we practice entirely in silence. The way we communicate is usually through bells and clappers. So getting a room to quiet down is interesting because we don't have that problem. We just kind of done. So it's always an interesting adventure to see how in these different sort of interfaith, interspiritual places, we can get people to drop in and be here. Right? So that's one thing I would ask. Before we get started, take a moment, be here. Close your eyes, drop in, sit in your chair, sink in. Everything else, all the conversations from before, all the socializing, just take a moment and allow yourself to be here. And when you feel like you're present, you've let go of the stuff from before, the stresses, the worries, all that stuff, come back. So my name is Hokyo Joshua Routhier. This is...
I'm Corvus Nocturnum. I write under E.R. Vernor, so some of you probably know me both ways. We have for you our life story, kind of, and what we're trying to pass on to you, what we gained from our individual paths in our lives as a Buddhist and a Satanist, and how they're strangely more similar than you might think.
Yeah, one of the things that was interesting is when I met Corvus, one of the things that was funny is you'd think these two guys coming from very, very different traditions would have nothing in common, and actually what we found was the exact reverse, is that we had gone opposite directions in the path. We had gone through trials, tribulations, and traumas, and somehow came out the other end more effective, more here, more present, more capable. And my take on that is that there is something unique. It doesn't matter what your flavor of spirituality is, what your theater is, whether you practice Norse paganism, whether you're doing some form of sorcery, whatever it is, you're on the path. Some level you've chosen to awaken, you've chosen to be here, you've chosen the spiritual path, and that's a huge responsibility. And so what we wanted to do is take a moment and just share with you what our stories are, where we came from, because we feel like there's a lot of universal pieces in them. And then what we want to do is kind of use those stories, and with your guys' sort of questions and statements and thoughts, kind of try to weave a larger narrative, larger question about how do we walk this path, right? Because you guys can go read a book if you want to know how to do energy working, right? If you want to learn how to deal with the subtle body and all that, there's people here that can teach you way better than me. But how do you stay present in your life? How do you take personal responsibility? How do you learn how to be compassionate in the face of insult and injury? Right? That's a tremendous endeavor to go under, and one that comes with a lot of scars. So with that, I give it to Corvus.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Joshua, for joining me up here yet again. We did this class a couple years ago at Convocation, and it went over so well that we decided there are a lot of people that come together that don't come to one or the other or happen to miss it, and we were asked, hey, why don't you do this again? We really enjoyed you guys' energy working off of each other, the so-called polar opposites of the spectrum, where you have someone who is, about compassion and peace and love versus, a stereotyped religion that is all about the self, And my response to that negativity is, if you don't put yourself first, show of hands, how many of you are parents? Have kids or some responsibilities other than yourself? Well, if you don't take care of you, who's going to take care of the ones dependent on you? So that's how I approach Satanism, and apparently I'm doing it right because they promoted me to media rep and reverend. So, I just keep doing my thing and hope that I'm right. But one of the things that drew me to Joshua is I had at least a vague understanding of Western spirituality. I had studied Zen aspect of the martial arts, even though I wasn't, coordinated enough to actually do, kung fu or anything. So I was fascinated by it. So at least I studied the philosophies, and I thought this is really cool. This is about, appreciation of things that I could identify with, but I knew it wasn't me. And that's one of the things that I like to tell people at different talks and everything is each of us, whether it's our background that we came from or where we're at right now, these are aspects that you can identify with right now. It doesn't have to be what I think, it doesn't have to be what he thinks, or what your parents raised you as. You're always going to be in a little state of flux, and we'll get into that later, talking about not being stagnant. But I think it's vital that if you understand where we came from and where we're going, maybe you'll see how that might possibly relate to your lives, that you don't have to be in a rut, be in, as Joshua says, be in this moment and accept it, but understand that it also might be a little more fluid. I came from a very broken home is putting it mildly. I don't even think about it very often unless I'm called to talk about it during an interview or something, but that's because I focus more on the now and what I want to reach forward for in empowering myself. When I say that the ego is important, it's because I'm trying to tell people you as self have to nurture yourself. You have to grow and evolve and take care of you. Then, and only then, you can be a good example for others and you can do for others if you're not falling apart. I think in some ways I went from a more Western mentality of spirituality, Eastern spirituality, and Native American philosophy to more coming around to the self with Satanism, because I think I reached a point where, yes, it was good to know and understand other people and other cultures, but I realized I was messed up. And to go anywhere in life, I had to fix me, and I had to worry about, am I doing things right? Am I not being healthy enough? I mean, those of you that follow me on Facebook, I work myself to death. I have to be reminded to eat. So, some of you have even poked me at conventions and say, did you sleep last night? Did you eat? Bad Satanist. We're trying to be better human beings, and we need reminders. I think it's important to not forget where you come from, because I am aware of the past that I have of parents in prison and things like that, and foster homes that I grew up in. But I think instead of wallowing in the self-pity and the baggage, I accept it. I move forward from it and go, oh, well, my life tomorrow is what I choose to make it, not what my family did. I think in some ways, like when I went to the hotel at the front desk, and they were having a little struggle to figure out the room key, and I was like, don't worry. I did that job before I was night auditor at a hotel. And they're actually happy. If you can relate to other people, even for a moment, like me, I can relate to a foster kid, I can relate to the McDonald's worker or somebody in the military or hotel industry. I've been in those positions. Just because you see me now as a speaker and a writer, that is not wholly of what I was. It's all pieces of how I've evolved. And I think when you suffer through a lot of things, that it can either tear you down completely or it can build you up, where you have the strength to keep going. And if you can overcome these hurdles, you can actually become better, because you realize I came from nothing. I was homeless once. Now I own a couple businesses. If I can do those things, other people can too. People can come to me for advice. I can help them, to whatever my limitations are. I'll never tell people I know everything about anything, because I think we're all at a point where we're all trying to learn. Because the moment you say I know everything about something, you're an idiot. I mean, this is about growth and expanding yourself. So, the biggest thing I can stress is I came from a particular viewpoint, and just because this is working for me right now doesn't mean everybody else has to do the same thing. I'd like everybody, if anything, just to follow my lead in exploring as many different things as you can. So even if you're going to bash another type of mentality, which I don't recommend, even as a Satanist, I'm not saying all Christians are bad, evil people. That's not how I came to it. It just happened to fit me. What fits you right now may not fit you 5 years from now. But at least it's an experience you had and you learn from it. Hopefully you grow from it, or maybe you'll stay on the same course. But at least be open-minded and aware of the other things that are out there and the different types of people that you're going to encounter. Because honestly, I think that's what's wrong with the world at large, is we're so judgmental about, and I'm not saying us as all of us individually pointing fingers, but we're a part of that collective. So the more we're able and willing as a human race to look at other people as individuals and what baggage they may have and try to at least relate to them in a little way, maybe we won't jump to snap decisions so quickly. Yes, we're human beings, we're flawed, we're going to have bad days, we're going to take things out on each other. You know, in mass, we take it out on each other in, you know, other countries in wars and things like that. You know, Helen of Troy, things like that. That's just one example. But you know, I don't want to derail too much from the topic. So I'm going to let you take over.
All right. Fair enough. So I can give you a quick rundown of my background. That doesn't mean it's yours, doesn't mean there's things in there that you may resonate with or may not, but the question is how do they affect me, what do I do with them? I come from a family with multi-generational sexual trauma. I myself am a secondary survivor. On top of that, dealt with individuals with manic depression, which is always fun. My job currently is a case manager where I work with individuals with severe schizophrenia. To me, our background, our narrative, our story is in flux. So if you look at the psychology, you look at the way we are, what you remember now about who you are will change depending on your mood, depending on what you think, feel, and act in that moment. Don't believe me? I can show you the studies. Hippocampus changes, memories change. You literally can reconstruct them. What was once a happy, wonderful memory is now something a little bit darker, a little more uncomfortable. We do this sometimes in subtle ways, we do it in larger ways. Then we take our preferences, which change ever so often, right? Our thoughts, which come and go, our feelings, which are constantly coming and going. And then these four things we sort of gestalt into a self, right? We call that a self. We use these little these pixie sticks, make a shape of a person and pretend that's who we are. And then we play that narrative again and again, allowing ourselves to be stuck in our own conditioning because of the things that happened to us in childhood, things that happened to us 5 minutes ago. Right? The brain's already made a decision before you're consciously aware of it. We also know that from psychology. Neurology has showed this quite clearly. So there's not a way to become unprogrammed. There's not a way to become not conditioned. In fact, Ramana Maharshi did it. He woke up at 15, stared up at the sky. His mom just died. He saw a star go by, woke up. For 5 years, he sat in a cave drooling. Monks would have to come in and clean him, take care of him, because he was absolutely lost in a non-dual state of being. Fundamentally, no self, no one there, no one's home. One with everything. Not just energy, not just this, ecstasy thing people seek out. Absolute fundamental being. In fact, they actually say that his body was guarded by a tiger during that time. And the monks would actually have to bow and treat this tiger with respect in order to enter. I'll get back to that in a minute. 5 years later, he ends up waking up, or maybe less so doing so, reconstructs a sense of ego and starts talking, starts interacting, starts connecting with people. Entire sense of self destroyed, reconstructed. I mention these things because I understand that breakage, and I know that sounds like an egocentric comment, right? Oh, look at me, how great I am. So I'll tell you a story about how great I am, right, supposedly. So I went to a session once, 7-day Zen retreat. It's the first time I went there, met my idol, my now teacher, Junpo Dennis Kelly. And while I was there, I did what I normally do. my programming, looking for codependency, right? Saw a girl, absolutely fell in love, right? Just fell in love, wanted to know her. And I saw her sitting there after meal, where everyone's supposed to be silent, and her and this other guy are giggling. And instead of me kind of, letting them be in their own practice, doing their own thing, is I get jealous. I get angry. So I make a really shitty comment. And I don't mean a shitty comment like, shut the fuck up, you're supposed to be quiet. Like, no, when people fucking make noises in the Zendo, I want to pick up a katana and kill them. Right? This got back to the staff, as it rightly should. And so I've been sitting there for these days, grinding on this koan, no, K-N-O-W, no, N-O, again and again, in-breath, out-breath, over and over again, hours and hours, every day, right? With 6 hours of sleep in between. I get called to the principal's office, or in this case the Roshi's office, and I'm sitting there, having a panic attack, still grinding on this koan, still sitting there with this idea over and over again, like they're going to kick me out, I don't know what I'm going to do, this is what I want to do with my life, freaking out, having this break, right? And then things changed. The world melted, there stopped being a me, there stopped being an inside and out. And then about 2 months later, that solidified more so. Doesn't mean my actions changed, doesn't mean my things I had done, the causality changes. But who I am now and who I am then, they're not the same person. In my view, fundamentally, if you drop into who you are, drop into your heart, drop into the being you are, you recognize no self. That's my belief. From that no self, you recognize it from a causal state of being, from deep emptiness and stillness. Fundamentally, the self is actually popping in and out of existence moment to moment. And then we string those little dots together and call it a line, just like we do on a graph, and call that a self. But then we come to things like this, and we come usually for one of two things. People come to party and socialize, or they come because there's something they need. Maybe that's companionship, maybe that's some new form of spirituality, maybe they just don't know. They just know there's something more. When we constructed this class, the idea was, what is it that we can offer? We can teach you all sorts of things, interesting ideas, various technologies, right? But what I don't see at these conventions, I don't see this at Convocation, I don't see this at House Keperu often, again, I haven't been here in a while, is a really frank discussion about what this does in your life. In fact, every conversation I walked by today was either people kind of socializing, cool, that's good, or talking about their tech, talking about the stuff that we do, the practices we do, the stuff that we build, right? And in that case, I get no sense of who you are. I get no sense of who you are in this moment. We do this, in my view, as a way to avoid vulnerability, as a way to not actually connect.
We're all frightened little children. In a way.
Well, the ego thinks if it's vulnerable, then it can be hurt. The joke is, this is the paradox, is that from vulnerability, you can never be hurt, or never be hurt. This heart can never be broken. Plain and simple. Doesn't mean I can't feel pain, doesn't mean I don't absolutely get anguished when something sad happens. But my emotions are just that, transitory things that arise in my awareness. I am not my thoughts, my feelings, my preferences. I'm also not my history. I have to take responsibility for my history. But I am not that. So, for us, we both went through a lot of bullshit. I'll just call it what it is. And I guarantee you everyone here has as well. Doesn't matter who you are, what you've done, doesn't matter male, female, trans, whatever. Everyone here has something. Something in their past, some programming, whether that's some trauma in the past, whether that's for some reason you get in the same fight with your partner over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. Right? We're all stuck in these sort of programs. We're all stuck in this conditioning. And as I said before, you can't free yourself entirely from conditioning. You'll just sit there and drool, which is fun for you. The rest of us don't really have much to do with you then. Instead, the intention is change the program. rewrite the script, right? If you're sitting there suffering right now, if you're sitting there grinding on something, you have anxiety coming up, things are fundamentally bad, guess what? Fire your script writer because they're shitty. Right?
You have the right that who you were yesterday doesn't have to dictate who you are tomorrow. Every day that you wake up and look in the mirror, it's a day to really stare at the other person looking back at you.
Yeah.
You can say, I don't like this life, I don't like who I am, and you have the right to change it. Nobody's putting a gun to your head and forcing you to stay in a miserable, unhappy life. There's outside circumstances, there's influences, there's responsibilities, of course. But fundamentally, if you're willing to be honest with yourself and look inward and say, this is what's wrong with me, this is what society conditioned me, this is what my own mental hang-ups have caused, my own baggage has caused, you have the right to make changes. All we're doing is trying to help you open your eyes to that as a possibility to
Now,
make something different.
Yeah, and now here's the clause. Be real clear, this isn't a self-help class. I'm not trying to sell a book. I'm not trying to make you feel better about yourself. Honestly, how you choose to construct yourself is your own business. I would ideally hope that what arises from your heart is tremendous compassion for all that you are and all that you've experienced. I doubt that's true for a lot of people. And I'll also doubt that a lot of these words will fall deaf on people. It's not me being mean, it's not me trying to attack anyone. It's being very clear that what we're talking about, this endeavor of whatever you want to call it, personal responsibility, awakening, growth, no one does this. It's very few people. And I'm not saying that as, oh, I'm special, I'm great. I'm saying it as it takes a tremendous amount of willpower and it requires hitting rock bottom in some way. It requires a tremendous amount of pain, suffering, anguish in order to actually see yourself for what you are.
I think that's honestly the hardest task anybody has, is to really know who you are.
Yeah.
And it's the old idea that there are three faces: the one you see yourself as, the one that everybody else sees you as, and then the reality is somewhere in between, of trying to figure out what that is. If you can actually meld those together, congratulations, you've evolved beyond most people. Because most people are so stuck in bury their heads in the sand, they don't want to hear what other people have to say. And I'm not saying you have to conform to what everybody says you need to be, don't get me wrong there.
So one thing I'll add to this, and I actually said this at House Kepler, I said it really terribly 6 years ago. I still hold by it. I just try to say it more skillfully and only say it occasionally. There's a great quote from Ken Wilber in Integral Spirituality, and he says, if you look at development, you look at societal development within the first world, roughly 80% of people are around or below the stage of development that Germany was at 1933. Take that in regard with the Milgram experiment that humans naturally follow authority, and you get into a really scary thing where suddenly demagogues can rise because people fall into conditioning, they fall into fear, they fall into various forms of programming, a la Trump, right?
I was going to say Hitler, but you know.
Same difference. One of them had better hair, right?
Yeah.
So,
Which one was that?
yeah, I don't know.
There's the one with the mustache.
So, this is where you're screwed. And I'm sorry for saying this.
We're blunt people, sorry.
At the heart of every being, there is a choice. It is a question. That question is, do I want to wake up? And the answers are yes and not yet.
Everybody likes to pretend and think they're already awake when they're not. They don't want to be accountable. They don't want to be responsible. Even for people like us that really push hard to be teachers, leaders, students, because we're still all learning. Sometimes it's difficult even for us to say, I'm still screwing up. I don't have all the answers, like I said before. I'll be the first person to say, I can only teach you what I have learned up to this point, because I know I've still got another 45 years at least left to try to not screw up as much.
Yeah. And so trying to do that, when you eventually do choose this answer, when you do choose yes, and I mean a real yes, like the same yes you'd give a lover for consent, that deep yes of craving, of need, of want. When you are willing to say that yes, I'm sorry. because there's no going back. Short of head trauma, and I can trust you, I can show you, short of head trauma, you're fucked.
Once your eyes are open, you can't close them again. Because as long as you're in denial, and then you say, oh, that oh moment is going to change your life forever. And you're always going to question yourself, you're always going to seek better. And not just, I want to be filthy rich, it's you're going to seek to be a better human being, hopefully. And
Yeah.
it doesn't mean that you're going to not make mistakes. We're going to. It's who we are. It's can you learn from each of those progressive steps? Are you hopefully climbing higher up that ladder he's talking about, or are you going to be part of the mindless herd? And I have a very big problem with that. You know, I'd rather be the third side perspective that doesn't see things as right or left, black or white, but the varying shades that make us who we are as living people.
And so part of that, and I'm glad you used the word progressive, you used this idea of progress. I actually want to reframe that and actually call this a process. Awakening is not awake.
It's
You
aware.
get a glimpse and you continually struggle. And that's not fun, because you basically have two choices at that. What happens is you surrender to it and everything in your life burns down. Anything that's not true, anything that's not real, will be blatantly in front of you, painfully so. Lovers that you've cared about for years, it turns out you're in a codependent relationship where the person's toxic. Sorry. The great relationship you had with your mom, yeah, sorry about that. You basically had to stop talking to her because of her constant attempt to pull you into her narrative and story about how bad she was and how terrible she was. Right? People think this idea of awakening, oh, spirituality is so great. Yay.
Everything has its drawbacks. Everything to some degree, depending on how you use it, or choose not to use it or ignore it, because you can bury your head in the sand.
Yeah.
It's either a plus or a minus to make life better. But just because you're getting better doesn't mean it's not harder. In fact, life becomes harder on you once your eyes are open, because you realize all the shit you're fighting against to make yourself better. So the more, I think it, to some degree, and I may be a little biased and judgmental here, the more of an intellect you have, the more you question things around you, the rougher your life is, because ignorance is bliss. That's why so many highly intelligent people are unhappy, because they're aware of all the crap that's going on in their lives, and they're not just la 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 la.
Well, and also they're more susceptible to their own bullshit.
Yeah.
The problem is with a high form of cognition, you're great at rationalizing. You can do meta-rationalizing. You can do actually meta-rationalizing, where you actually rationalize about the rationalizing you did.
You're lying to yourself.
You're actually lying to your at least 4 other selves. And actually the 5th self knows that and doesn't want to tell the group.
Yeah.
Right? They don't want to share with the rest of the class.
We're not trying to depress you all, but
But this is what we deal with as human beings, is that as we grow, he talks about intellect, I talk about awakening. For me, as I said, there's 2 parts to this. So there's the part where you surrender and your life burns down. The other part, and this is where things get problematic, and most people do this, including me, because I have a hard head. You fight it. You argue with it. You don't want it to be this way. And your life burns down, and you get scars. You get pain of scars. People you love disappear because you basically turn into either, an egoist, sociopath. Basically pick whatever the day is. Generally, you'll start looking like a narcissist because your ego's clinging to anything it fucking can to not see. And the problem being is that as we go through this, the idea is, oh, we become so superior. No. You talked about the herd. And I stray away from that. I don't like the term herd because I think it's derogatory. But I will say this. If you look at human stage development, say a la Susan Cook-Reuter, 9 stages of human development, right? Construct aware, which I test at, generally is about 1% of the human populace. Generally that's held by people with formal graduate education. I did it basically by having an associate's degree and actually being willing to throw everything, including my life and my body, in the fire. That's not make me great. That makes me somebody who really, really enjoys pain. And so, to me, I don't want to say this. As you continue up your development, there is a belief that you will become elitist, superior, and better than others. And actually what happens is the reverse is true. The data we have suggests that you become more compassionate, more open, and you recognize the people around you that are suffering in this delusion. This programming, this conditioning, can do no other than that. The joke about psychology is we don't know why people develop. We know development happens, we can track it. Sentence completion testing, basic survey testing, we know this. We know that humans develop. You look at a child, everyone knows. A 5-year-old's not the same thing as a 10-year-old, right? But we don't talk about that with adults because that gets uncomfortable. Well, adults are all the same, right? No. What actually is true is actually there's a lot of 12-year-olds running around that have 20 years experience being a 12-year-old.
Now, I'll come at it from more the elitist point of view because
Yeah.
I'm more cynical. That's my particular path, is harsh realism taken to an extreme. I'll admit that. You know, Satanism is considered the alien elite. Alien because there's not many people that think at this scale of the differences. But I don't do it in a derogatory tone, or at least I try not to. I'm one of the few members of my order that don't come across as complete assholes.
Still working.
Huh?
Yeah.
You know, some are on the sliding scale of how ruthless they might appear. You know, I've met plenty of them. And I get along with all of them. It's just how much alike we are versus not. And sadly, some people that call themselves Satanists do just cling to it because they think it's an excuse to find a religion that they can be an asshole to people, but that's not what it's about. It's never been a social activism thing. It's more about how much of a better human being can you make you into. Because you have this idea of the potential ultimate human, or you know, that you can be, and you struggle to attain that knowing you know never will get there. But how I use it is, this is how far I've come. I've still got X amount of years left, hopefully. And what more can I do? It's great if other people see that and say, oh, Corvus is a nice guy, he's a good example, let's try to do some of the things he talks about. But I really don't care if you do or not. Because I have to care if I continue that course of action or not more.
Yeah, and I come from a different view is that, so in Buddhism we take 4 vows. And where ours are a little bit paraphrased, we do everything in English in my order because we're not Japanese. Right? And those vows are something to the effect of basically, may all beings sentient and sentient awaken. May we see our shadow and look past it and move past it and enlighten the pathological and disowned parts of self. Any tool that comes about, you need to master that and use it. So it's not just about my path anymore, it's about, oh, time to get in therapy. Now it's time to actually start taking care of your body. Right? Embodiment. And it's vowing to awaken. It's vowing to stay on this path no matter what happens. To me, I come at it from a view that as we grow and develop, we take on more responsibility. Sorry, if you're top of the class, you have to deal with everyone else. I'm an old Sartre, right? And Sartre's part is generally can be summed up in one kind of idea. Absolute freedom is absolute responsibility. If I harm you, if I hinder you, if I treat you derogatory, if I act in an elitist fashion, I'm actually hindering your growth. I'm actually hindering who you are. I'm taking away your freedom, which thus it binds me to you and takes away mine. Right? Compassion is not just about altruism. Compassion is about recognizing that actually what we do when we liberate is the first thing we do, we liberate others from ourselves. Think about how hard it is for those around you, dealing with your shit every single day, and then how hard it is to deal with theirs. It's amazing human beings can construct relationships with this stuff.
I'm the first to admit I wouldn't want to live with me.
Fair. So, the goal is, as he said, to be a better person and find out what that means. We are born into circumstances we can't control. You didn't choose your parents, you didn't choose to speak English, you didn't choose to be born in this time, you didn't choose the particular geographical reconstructions of how you fit as this particular embodiment. You didn't choose the type of body you have, right?
We're not all Arnold Schwarzenegger genetics.
Yeah. You don't believe me? Great book, Sports Gene. Look at it. There is such a thing as people being born just talented. We like to think everyone can do it. Well,
There's something called stratification. Not everybody's meant to be like everybody else, and we'd live in a really boring world if we were, you know, to be honest.
So, I guess, you know, we can keep up here blathering, and that's what we're doing. I actually considered doing an old Trungpa Rinpoche. So, the story goes like this. People are sitting in front of a stage, there's a single microphone and a glass of scotch. Right, this is a Buddhist Roshi, fundamentally looked at as a completely awake being. He also was a crazy motherfucker. Did a whole bunch of crazy wisdom shit, fucked all his students, right? Went the whole fucking rail, did all of it. So, people go there, sits down, and they wait for the Roshi, they wait for the priest to come out. 15 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour, 2 hours. And then he comes out, not in robes, not in his formal regalia. He comes out wearing basically a jacket and just, you know, clothes very similar to what I am. He comes up to the microphone. You know what he says? Picks up the whiskey, takes a sip. There's still time, and walks away. Right? And so if you get that joke, if you understand what that's actually pointing to, there's a deep wisdom in that. We don't have anything for you. I don't have the goods. I can't wake you up. I'm sorry. Neither can Corbus, neither can Michelle, neither than any person here. One of the parts that Corbus and I agree on deeply is you have to choose. In my order, what we call is taking your seat. Take your seat, it will not be given to you.
And we say responsibility to the responsible. As wildly different as you might originally have walked into this room thinking that our paths are totally polar opposite, they're more alike than they are different in how we see the world itself. It's just we have different emotional context in how we feel about it.
So as I said, we can keep up here blathering, but as Trungpa said, there's still time. So what do you think? What stands out to you? What do you want to know?
You can buy
This is not
books.
rhetorical.
You can buy books, you know, but you don't get to ask the people the questions that you're pondering at the end of every chapter. We're here now because we want to help you relate to us. If you have questions when we walk out of here, unless you find us online, you may not have that moment again. And we want to actually, you know, have a rapport with you guys and have you, you know, possibly, if something we said triggered a thought in your head that maybe you want to know more about.
Something you said did actually trigger something. It was an exercise that my mom walked me through. When you said, you know, taking a stern hard look in the mirror, she told me to actually, I grew up in a funeral home. So she said, picture yourself in the coffin. I'm like, what? And she said, no, picture yourself there. What do you want to do today to change you so that when you are there, you're happy?
It's pretty deep teaching.
Oh yeah.
If you look into the Tantra paths, there's actually some practices that people developed. Now there's argument whether these became these were westernized versions or whether they were real, but basically one of the things they would do is they wanted to point out impermanence. So, like you said, they would recognize what it's like to be dead, so they would basically lay among dead bodies to see what it's like.
I thought I was creepy.
Right? When they were in a relationship, you notice that first part of a relationship where everything's really great, right? You really can't stop being around each other. It's so good, right? You're not really looking at each other. You're just looking at a projection of what you want that person to be. And then about 30 days to 6 months later, you suddenly go, oh shit, there's a person there.
The NRE is gone. You start to get to really know them.
You know what they do in some schools is they go, so I want you to meditate upon your beloved. Think about your husband, your wife, your girlfriend, your whatever. And then I want you to imagine them for what they truly are, which is a bag of shit and meat.
He's so nice.
Because what we want to do is break that illusion. What you're looking at is a projection. What you've done is your psychology has kicked on, about 80 different parts of the brain have kicked in, and what's happening is you're basically creating an idea of who this person is, and then being in a relationship with that. And they're doing the same thing, which looks really good on paper, until it breaks and there's a real person there. And so we try to get through that phase as quickly as possible on that path, because it's delusion, it's illusion, it's not real.
If you can still stick it out after that, then you got something.
So one thing I do, and also, and this is a personal favorite of mine, I actually said this to my beloved Furu. She, when we first got together, I didn't say, oh, I love you, you're wonderful. What I said was, this will end. Either through breakup or death.
It's kind of freaky at first, but you get used to it.
Such a cheery fellow.
And that's not to be depressing. To me, that's actually incredibly enlivening. How many days pass where you kind of, you might talk to your partner, or you might talk to your family member, you might talk to a friend, and you just kind of blindly walk through, right? Interact with your life kind of gently. Coming back to the death position, how do you get from here to there? To me, the way I frame that is, every single second, reality is popping in and out. Cognition creates an illusion of subject-object referencing. You're over there, I'm over here, we seem to be two. That is incorrect. And because of this linearity, because of this idea that there's this thing, time, right, how we gauge motion, what we end up doing is we think that that's going to go on forever. Right? We go into, lizard brain, and we basically act in our lives as though it's going to continue forever and ever and ever. The truth is that every single moment as it pops into reality, within your cognition, within your awareness, within your consciousness, is a gift. And here's where things get really wild. Your relationships, the people you're with, your mother, or individuals where you're in a romantic relationship, instead of thinking about it, oh, I'm dating this person, maybe, if you want to, realize that this other human being, of their own will and accord, has chosen to spend a majority of their time with you, and if you're in a romantic relation, chosen to exclusively have sex with you unless you have another social contract. They've fundamentally chosen this.
Out of all the billions of options out there.
And suddenly relationship becomes alive, and suddenly we recognize these moments passing. Suddenly we recognize that every moment I have with this person, even if the relationship ends in 2 years and we're really mad at each other, it's still a gift. There's still love there.
Make the most out of the moments is what he's saying. Yeah, that's my translation.
Yeah.
Is I don't care, and I've said this in other lectures before of different topics.
You don't care.
But if you live once, or you believe in multiple lives, I don't care. Make the most out of the one you're in. Are you going to look back on your life near your deathbed and say, I lived my life to the fullest? Was I happy? Of course you're not going to be happy all the time. That's life. That's the hard reality. But did you make the most of it? Did you enjoy the choices you made? Did you enjoy the people you interacted with? You could break that down to as simple as, are you glad you came to gather this weekend? Versus going somewhere else on your vacation time or something else.
Yeah. And I would actually take that a little bit further. Corbett said you're not going to be happy all the time. I would actually say the goal of the path is to not aim for that. Happiness is a feeling. It comes and goes. Just like fear, sadness, anger. They are just phenomena arising. In fact, what they are is they're biocognitive effects that happen. The body has some kind of reaction, be it fear, right? Amygdala kicks in, all that stuff. Or, right, we see someone we really care about, we get all Twitter-pated. And then what ends up happening is we then create an interpretation of that we call a feeling.
You're paraphrasing Al Pacino in The Devil's Advocate when he says love is like eating massive amounts of chocolate. Chemical reaction in the brain.
Well, and I'm not trying to put this down to all science. What I'm trying to point out is that we are instructed from get-go that your feelings are preferences. You have a preference for certain feelings. You like happiness over sadness. You like feeling righteous anger over feeling weak and powerless, right? And what I actually want to say is that for me, it's a little bit framed differently. I don't give a fuck about happiness. And I don't care about contentment and all these other things, because all of them are just impermanence. Feelings are just information. They tell me what's happening in the moment, no different than my thoughts or my other 5 senses. What happens when we attach to them or we strive for them and we want just this one feeling is then when we start having problems. That's when we suffer. We get stuck in a program, right? So you look at a couple, and one partner says, I want to start seeing other people. I want you to be my primary partner, but I want to see other people, right? And her partner says, I can't do that, freaks out. And so they never bring that topic up again. That topic's now become a landmine. They've created a program.
It's the elephant in the room.
Yeah, they've now created a program, and the point of the program is to dance around it and never do it. And then usually what happens is it becomes enshadowed. They disown it, right? They either start becoming rigid, angry, and then they act out, or they disown it and then it comes out in some other form, like cheating and whatnot. So the point of this is not to attach, but to recognize feelings, recognize who you are, what is coming up. How do
Be
you
honest with yourself.
Yes. Yeah.
So hopefully I can frame this. You said something about how people kind of generally test at a consciousness level of like 1933 Germany, and it made me think of this idea of like a collective unconscious. Do you, either of you believe in that, and if so, does awakening kind of remove you from that collective unconscious?
Yes, no, and maybe.
Yeah, I personally believe in it, because how could you have so many different cultures all over the world before massive communication with other sides of the planet, all having similar mythos and gods, goddesses, whatever you want to call it, or ideas of even the archetype of good and evil, or the archetype of a vampire or witch or whatever, sharing those same ideas. Of course, there's a collective unconscious of some kind. You have to be able to explain it somehow.
I would actually be a little more mean about it. Yes, there is a collective unconscious. It's boring. And the reason I say that is that humans are incredibly anthropocentric. You'll notice all of our mythos are about people, or people-like things, or animals and rocks, stones, sky, clouds, doing people things. We anthropomorphize. What I actually like to think is that the reason the culture unconscious exists is actually because we're all really boring. We're not very inventive, so we just keep constructing the same symbols. We might add a little different of a cultural flair, right? So instead of being Jesus, it's Mithra. But roughly the same thing. Death, rebirth, a bull, lamb, tomato, tomato, right?
Take your pick.
Is that why they keep making movies out of old TV shows?
Yeah. And to me, I don't think you can be taken out of that. Because in order for you to be a you, to be a self, you are still connected into that, you are still connected into whatever that is. Now, do I believe in a sort of spiritual, high-minded idea of it? That's where the maybe comes in. If you're talking about unified consciousness as non-dual, Turiya Tita, in the traditions they have what's called Turiya, witness consciousness. I recognize fundamentally all phenomena arising. Not just everything here, but actually the self arising as phenomenon. It's a construct that I make up every single moment. That's Turiya. And then eventually I recognize that the universe is looking back, and that's Turiya Tita. And at that moment the world's on fire. So to me, that's where the maybe comes in, because that consciousness is unified. Because at that level of no self, what makes me different than you? At this depth of still, silent, vast, imperturbable awareness, how could I ever be different than you? And from that depth, then the question arises, how could I ever harm you? To harm another is to harm myself. So yeah, that's my take. Yes?
I'd like to address the thing you were talking about at the beginning, that
Sure.
you were listening to the conversations. And one of the things that I run into is that if I really open up and start talking, I guarantee I will hit something that somebody challenges somebody's concept of reality in some way. Whether that's religion, science, medicine, whatever. And the thing I've run across too is that I can tell them about that. I can go tell them, okay, you go to these sources over here. Go read it for yourself. I've never had anybody come back to me and say, oh, I went and read that. That's interesting.
I would.
And I don't give a damn if they believe it or not. I'd like them just to go and have the open-mindedness to go check it out.
But
Does anybody else get that? You get the deer in headlights, and
Yeah,
then,
yeah,
and
it's
then
called-
they're
it's called
wandering
Facebook.
away to find somebody else.
It's called Facebook. You post something about politics, philosophy, spirituality,
You know you're
and then
poking
some
the bear.
asshole you friended like 2 years ago pops on and says the dickiest thing possible. Right?
we're
And
all
that's
spoiled children, that's the thing. We all want our way, we all think everybody else should think like us. Well, I don't. I don't care enough.
Well, it would just be nice if people were a little bit more open-minded and didn't just dismiss things out of hand.
I'll listen, I'll ask questions, I'll try to learn. I'd be the one to read the book because I want to know. I'm not so full of what I think that I'm going to wall off everything else because I know I'm right.
For me, it's about how do I construct my reality, and then actually, eventually getting really bored with that, and recognizing that actually I don't know how you do that. One of the greatest realizations I ever had was that if I actually am really true about my interiority, that is the sense of self that's in here, right, the stories, all the things that I know that, and I kind of know the stuff out here. I actually can't ever know you. Fundamentally, I could live with you for 20 years, and I will never know your interiority. I will never know who you are inside.
I don't know where that came
Weird
from.
tangent. My point is that rather than showing up with anger, take responsibility for it. Show up with curiosity.
Well, I used to get angry at that, and then it's just like, you know, I kind of had to compartmentalize my life and talk to certain people about certain things, and
Well, then what I do is I come from curiosity. I ask, man, you really seem to care about this. Tell me more. Because what they're doing with you, and this is my take, is everything everyone does is communication. The way you're sitting right now is communication. When you lie to me, that's actually a form of communication. You're telling me things. So when someone gets really attached to a thing, like my big thing is certain types of political format. Oh, love ranting about that, right? But what I'm telling you is something about my interiority. I'm giving you a glimpse into that, and that person's actually, what they're doing is sharing. So what I do is I open up. It's not about my attachment to my concept or my desire for them to do any one thing. I actually listen deeply, take in what they're saying. Because what happens is eventually the adrenaline wears off, right? Because they're in a fight or flight mode, they're in amygdala, wham. That adrenaline lasts about 15 minutes. And then they calm down and they go, man, I'm sorry, I was being a dick. And then now we can have a real adult conversation.
Hopefully.
Most of the time, in my experience. I believe you had something?
Yeah, I'll just kind of going along with that. Just like what you were saying before, I think you mentioned like the Milgram experiment, and you were talking about politics, and yeah, just to add to that, I mean, I would kind of say for one thing, most people told me, most people when they talk about politics, they don't really want to have like a really in-depth analysis of all the issues. They want people to tell them what they want to hear, basically.
They want the confirmation they're right? Is that what you're saying?
More, yeah, well, more or less, yeah, more. They don't want to hear the other side more so much. Like I asked somebody one time about con artists too, or charlatans, whatever. They said, yeah, a lot of those people, maybe they might ask people, try to get people to do things really ridiculous that they wouldn't normally do. How do they do that? Because they can pass themselves off as being something that they know how to pass themselves off as authority or make themselves look like a reliable source when even though they're not. They just know how to get people to think that they are, and if they can do that, that's how at least most people. Instead, like, you know, it's like talking heads to newscasters. Again, I'd say they're more entertainers than they are actual.
No argument.
Yeah, more again, they can tell people what they want to hear, because most people just want to hear that. They don't want to have a real in-depth discussion of all the issues and hear all the sides. And
all you're seeing is a glimpse of other people anyway when they say or regurgitate what other political or religious leaders are saying.
yeah.
You're only seeing a facet. When you're having a conversation with somebody else of who they might be, that's just saying they identify with that particular ideology. You're not truly getting to know them. Like you said, you may live with someone 20 years and you don't fully understand who it is you're living with. You know, because you're not inside their head, how could you possibly fully relate to them? You live with them because you like them, you love them, and you get along better than you would with total strangers that you haven't met yet. That's pretty much the only difference I see.
To me, you're talking about an echo chamber. And this is where it gets sad. It's not just Facebook. It's not just MSNBC. It's not just Fox News. CNN. I agree. We actually all are an echo chamber. We slowly but surely cultivate our social networks to people that believe what we do. We slowly but surely cultivate our lives with people that generally reify what we believe. And the reason being is generally the story that the ego's playing out moment home is me, 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 you, me, 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 me. And awakening kind of comes from you, me, you, me, you, me. It starts becoming less about this story, less about this narrative. Part of the problem is that we live in a really fucked up culture. If you look at the way the American zeitgeist is currently set up, the way the actual sort of, to borrow the term collective consciousness is sort of set up, the cultural mores, we, in many ways, could follow the same poisons and the problems that people of the past did. And the people I'm talking about is not just, we cannot do the obvious fallacy of calling something Hitler, or I can actually point to the Crusades. I can point to all these times where people thought they were inherently right, they wanted to hear nothing about it. They use fault, God wills it. And that's the problem, is that we live in that world. We actually are all in culture to it. You see people post these things, you see people say these things. They say them with such authority and such belief that they're true. And then they share shit on Facebook that's patently wrong. If I see one more person share anything about only using 10% of your brain, I will slap the living silly shit out of you.
Yeah, isn't it? Yeah, I've heard of that. Isn't it more like your whole brain isn't always active at the same time?
Your whole brain is constantly doing shit all the time.
Or is
Stick
it,
your head in
I don't
the
know where
MRI
that
machine, you'll see.
statistic came from.
But that's the type of shit we share. We share fucking myths over fucking Facebook. It's just no different than the campfire.
And yet we believe it to be gospel? I don't. I mean, I don't do politics, I don't do religion. Well, occasionally I'll do religion if it has to do with, what I'm speaking on at a convention. But, I try to stay away from those hot buttons because I believe everybody has the right equally to be wrong. And that sounds like a dick thing to say, that I'm right, you're not. But I'm just as wrong as I think all of you might be. But I don't like to poke the buttons and try to rile you up, because you're entitled to those opinions and that worldview and where you're coming from, because you have your own reasons for feeling that way. It doesn't mean they're right or wrong. That's your feelings.
Mm-hmm. Except.
It's true.
So, here's one of the problems we have. We had a podcast in the Great Lakes region. We have a thing called the Great Lakes Integral Podcast, and one of our episodes we talked about the notion of expertise. We've lost that in this culture. Mm-hmm. We don't have wise men, we don't have shamans. And I'm not just talking about spiritual matters, I mean every matter. Every motherfucker with Google thinks they're an expert in every goddamn thing. And actually, because the sources they often cite, such as Wikipedia and various other things, actually what they're doing is spreading tons of ignorance, and they're actually walking around, in some cases, violating law, but actually just really fucking up. The problem is we actually have to get back to a place, in my view, where we're actually willing to listen. Right? So for example, let's say you have a PhD in psychology, right? I'm getting my master's. Generally speaking, you're not going to be right all the time, but you're probably going to be more right than me on most things. We're going to agree most of the time. They'll probably know something more than me because you have another 7 years of fucking experience, right? If you want to talk to an expert of energy working, you don't fucking go to some random person outside. You go talk to Michelle, because she's a goddamn master. That's what you do. You seek these people out. And Michelle, or any teacher here, goes, yeah, no, I know more about that than you. That isn't an attack on your fragile fucking ego. It's just the truth. You yourself are an expert in you. Your feelings, your thoughts, and all that. And those things need to be owned and taken. But we have to get to a place where we stop being so fucking willing to lash out. That every little thing cracks this facade. When I said earlier, vulnerability, at this depth of consciousness, this heart can never be broken. If you really show up with vulnerability, no one hurts you. No one can hurt you.
It's like I said earlier, I don't care.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean I don't care about you as, human life. I don't care that you are different, that you feel and think differently, because it has no bearing on me. I'm so rock solid in what I think and know, unless something comes to me where I get educated and I change my worldview all of a sudden, then I feel, okay, I'm educated even more, I have a broader view. I'm not going to change, but I'm not going to force other people to change either. I want you to be as unique an individual as you are, so I don't live in automaton world where everybody's exactly alike.
To me, we live in a really weird paradox. Again, just think about this universe for a minute and realize that we have to eat other living beings to function, and again, eventually heat death will happen. It's a really weird concept. Someone could build a better one. My point is that if you're really coming from a spiritually awakened perspective, not Buddhist, not Satanist, not whatever the fuck you call it, because honestly it's all theater. It's the greatest piece of wisdom Zen ever gave me. Whether I'm wearing a fucking dress, you're wearing robes, whatever the fucking thing you're doing is, it's theater. It's not the clothing, it's not the tools, it's you. That's your way of framing it, that's your foci, those are the ways you create
They're
reality.
tools.
They're tools, but they're not doing it, you are. You awake. They don't make you awake and they don't do anything, that's what happened. And so when we get to that depth, when we get to that place, here's the joke. It's not that I don't care. For me, it's not this, I don't care, I'm just gonna, you're allowed to think what you want. To me, it's, there's no one there to fucking hurt. Right? What you're talking to is just pure awareness. If I'm really dropped in, and I'm not there all the time, right? I get hungry, I get sleepy, default mode network kicks in, and I turn into an asshole. Many people here probably remember that. And what ends up happening is that when we actually are able to sustain that, be in that place, other people's views, even if they're conflictual with ours, we're able to hold them. We're able to be with them rather than lash out. Does that make sense?
When I was listening to these two gentlemen here, and they're very good friends of mine, I come up with people tell me there's a difference between open-minded and like-minded, right? Is it possibly both? Even though I do it a lot lately, because to me, before I got on my own path, I studied Taoism, of course, before I got on the left-hand path, of course, because I just felt that one cannot exist without the other, like darkness and light, or something like that, or masculine and feminine, the whole etc., etc. I think if the conclusion is, when I was even doing my research, balance is the key, I guess. So
They're both right, they're both wrong. Every path has its own wisdom that you can take away from it, but none of them are the end-all be-all.
Okay, sure.
That's my take.
Sure thing.
So my take is, this is where the Zen guy in me comes out.
Okay.
Who is the one that wants to be like-minded and open-minded?
Personally, I would be both. I don't care what it takes.
Who is the one asking the question?
Me.
Who's aware of me?
Me, I guess.
And who's aware of that me?
So on, etc., etc., etc.
So what you're doing is doing a recursive loop, right? So what's aware of the recursive loop?
Because I'm not familiar with that term.
So there's endless me's being aware of me, right? That's the game. So you ask the koan, what is Buddha? Who's asking? And what they go is, well, me. And they go, well, who's aware of me? Me? Who's aware of that me?
Oh boy.
Me? And then what you do is you let them do this for a while. Generally, when I work with people one-on-one, I let them do it for about an hour.
You're just not
Because I hope that at some point they'll just break open and laugh. Because what they eventually get is, and then I ask the question, who's aware of the recursive loop? Who's aware of all the me's that are aware of me? And then what happens, people, if they really drop in, if they really are insightfully honest and willing to actually be vulnerable, what they say is, I don't know. Who are you? I don't know.
I don't know. But I'm just filling in
You're
the
made
blanks.
up of many different pieces of what you've learned, your emotional reactions, what other people have influenced you. But like I said before, it shouldn't define you in your own life.
You actually fundamentally can't, because the only time that happens is if you can think of the ego as sort of air. It can contract, and when it does, it becomes pressurized. It can be problematic, right? The problem is that when we contract, what we do is from fear, sadness, anger. What we do is we cling to an idea, we cling to something. So when we get back to this idea of like-mindedness and open-mindedness, from the rational mind, those two things seem different.
Yes, they are.
from this depth of mind, there's never been a question.
Okay. Just checking because the thing is with me, I've been focusing on the self more, but I do keep an open mind on other possibilities. People tell me keep your options open or something like that.
How open is your mind?
More open than most people. I just don't know what to say. But I'm almost speaking for myself, of course.
Open to a vastness where there is no edges. Open to that depth, and you'll recognize that there is a like mind. There could never be otherwise.
Okay. Okay.
Sit with that for a while. You had something.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's changed a few times due to the other conversations. But,
Fair enough.
So, whenever it comes to taking care of yourself, basically making yourself the one that takes priority versus making sure those around you are fundamentally being taken care of. You know, your life revolves around everybody being on the same page, basically making sure that everybody gets to that enlightenment. What happens when you fall in that playground where you feel that the only way to take care of yourself is through other people, where you have hit to a point where you realize that you're hindering yourself in a degree by furthering others along, you slow down your own personal progress, yet at the same time, the only way to make sure that you're, I wouldn't say happy, but the only way to consider yourself fulfilled would be to continue to help others. So your personal fulfillment is by helping others, but
like a nurse
at the
or
same
something.
time, there's an internal side of you that realizes that what you're doing is not personally gainful.
I think a lot of people suffer from that, where they're so full of being a caretaker, whether it's their profession or just their personal nature, that they're giving so much, they're exhausted, and then they grow to become resentful of the people that they're giving so much to, because they're not happy in themselves and they're not taking care of them. That maybe if they balanced it a little better and took care of themselves first and were happy, and then did for others, they'd have both halves of themselves complete. That would be my response to that.
Okay. My response would be is that you're either codependent or you're a bodhisattva. So the first one is, why are you giving care? Because if it's giving care so I can get care, or giving care because I think it'll make me a better person, I like to tell myself stories. No, that's just creating a new prison. It's a shinier prison, but it's still a prison.
The lie of altruism.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
The truth is that if you fundamentally, from an irrational, absolutely conscious depth of awareness, simply feel the urge to take care of other beings, in fact, it could never be otherwise, well, then you probably should talk to me later.
Have a different conversation, got it, okay.
Because the thing is that in at least my path, see, Zen comes from Mahayana Buddhism, the second turning of the wheel. And in my path, what happened was we got bored of all the Theravada bullshit, and then we, supposedly Nagarjuna went down to the sea, found some scrolls some dragons were hiding, and then started reading them and realized that the actual goal is not to become an arhat, it's not to disappear on a hill and never talk to anyone again. The goal is to become a bodhisattva. If you really truly wake up, you become a being of service. It can never be otherwise. It's not about telling myself a story, it's not about me being a great person, it's about simply there's no other way to be. And what happens is that we do this because we are holding the door open for everyone else. Remember how I earlier said I don't like elitism? It's because from a particular depth, everyone's in the same place. Everyone's suffering in the same way, the same delusion. And the question is that when you come from that depth of service, is it about you completely waking up and ditching everybody, or is it about keeping the door open and making sure all sentient and insentient beings awaken? That's a very, very different place to come from than just playing an ego game.
Exactly.
You can lead a horse to water, but you can't force it to drink unless you force
I
it
guess,
to.
with that, the bigger question is, once you get to that point, is it then a act of self or an act of service? It's kind of hard to differentiate the two, because an act of self, it doesn't really include self-preservation, but you are maintaining yourself in order to continue that service. To a
I think
degree.
it's
It's
detrimental
not
to you.
altruistically destructive in the sense. You are making sure that you are still able to maintain that level of service to other people.
Yeah, and part of the thing about the sort of the bodhisattva piece is that people like to think altruism is this all or nothing thing. Like I have to self-destruct in order to make sure I take care of myself, to take care of others, right?
Yeah.
And the truth of the matter actually is, I would say that's the dumbest fucking thing I've ever heard. Here's
So
the
what's
joke.
that about the empty well? You know,
Yeah. So one of the things that happens a lot in caregiving professions, anyone is a nurse, social worker, counselor, you get this thing where people overwork and they burn out.
Yeah. Then what good are they to anybody else?
What I would say is actually what happens is you'll end up killing yourself. If compassion, and this is the hardest fucking thing, everybody struggles with this, and I don't get why, except I do because I do it too. Compassion for everyone, all sentient and insentient beings, includes me.
It's common sense, or it should be.
And honestly, we like to think that it doesn't. We want to be this self-sacrificing individual, and the problem being is, if you're really coming from that depth, you've already self-sacrificed, there's no one there.
Yeah.
As my teacher would say, is putting a gun to your head is homicide, not suicide. You're killing a person. When you sit deeply in the cushion, you're committing ritual suicide. You're letting yourself, you're willing to die again and again. And when you get to that place, when you're actually willing to do so, from that, we recognize that we too need care. Sometimes I have to take time for myself. I have to be by myself. I need to read. I need to do something where, in order for me to continue serving people, I need to make sure that I'm okay. This isn't about beating myself up. It's not about running myself ragged. It's about fundamentally, absolutely compassion for all. If anyone's left out, you're fucking up.
And I think that's the one key thing we saw eye to eye on early on, above anything else, is the self is equally as important as everybody else, because we individually are parts of the whole. And I think so many people get so caught up in either all about me, and as a Satanist to say all about me can't be bad, it might seem oxymoronic, but if you do it stupidly, you have to put you first, but not to the point where you're oblivious to everybody around you. I'll put it to you this way. It's cause and effect. I'm a writer. If I was the stereotype asshole to everybody, nobody would buy my books. I would starve to death. I genuinely am, I feel, a nice person. I truly care about my fellow man, because I understand I'm a part of the whole. If I'm truly nice to you guys, you'll listen to me, you'll respect me, you'll talk about me, and that makes me happy because it means my life had a purpose. I know I'm going to die eventually. I want to leave a legacy that my life mattered. Not that it will matter to me after I'm gone, but part of me while I'm here wants that to matter, like you said about look in the coffin. How do you want to see yourselves at the end of your life? Did you do everything you could, not only to make everybody else happy, but did you not throw your life away for, like you were saying, other people?
Yeah, and the big, actually, originally this had come from the idea of what the two of you wanted to each other and expanded, because I realized that with your direction you're taking, you're actually, your entire existence is a construct of the way that you affect other people. Because there's no possible way that you yourself can be successful without having a positive influence on others.
Right. I'd like to think that way.
Yeah, the same way. On your end, the only way that you can enlighten everybody is if you're able to take care of yourself, because otherwise you're going to burn out early. That's not going to be, it's not going to help you.
Yeah.
So as you go down that road, as you're realizing more and more, that's kind of, there's a balance there to the path, but it's a mindset. There's similar paths, because it's the way you approach them and the way that you go about it that actually changes. And it's,
Yeah. Well, there's a couple pieces I want to add.
but I was going to say, and expand upon that as you will, because there's more to it, of course.
So remember when I said earlier that thereabouts were losers? One of the reasons why is because, the whole kill the self thing. I want to find whatever 60s fucking guru said, the goal is just to get rid of self. Well, yeah, but then weirdly enough it comes back. Right? If anyone here has ever done hallucinogens, and I mean a lot of hallucinogens, right? Also a form of ritual suicide. And what ends up happening is you go deep enough, you're gone. And then weirdly enough, the ego reconstructs. And then you go into deep dreamless sleep. So now you're going to sleep. And what's going to happen is you're going to enter REM for 3 to 4 hours, and then you'll go into deep dreamless sleep. And guess what? Sense of self is gone. All the things that make up self, alpha, beta, theta waves, those are off. All that's left is delta, basic awareness. That's the thing, is that
That's the
just,
drooling guy in the cave you're talking about, right?
yes, if you're awake while doing that, or awake, conscious. Again, the language gets difficult.
Yeah.
There's
a
another-
lot of translations.
There's another piece about this, and the reason that the kill yourself thing is so fucking asinine is that in order to serve, you have to live in the paradox. And the paradox being is I'm fundamentally not separate from you,
Right.
but there's the illusion and the appearance that we are. And so I have to live in the place where I recognize that actually right now you're suffering because you're choosing to. But I don't take this bizarrely like spiritual libertarian perspective where you do your own thing and I'm fine with that, right? You're free to fuck up. No, it's if I can help, I will. I'm not going to force you. I can't put a gun to your head. But I have to recognize that you're doing this. From the non-dual, there's never been any other way. And actually, this is where things get really wild, is that from the non-dual, from the absolute truth, the truth I take as capital T truth, even your shadows, even your ego games, even all your codependence, they're all divine. At that depth, it's all light, which gets dangerous, because then you have people who wake up too fast. Get a chance, when you're done with the convention, look up a guy named Adi Da. Guru who woke the fuck up too hard, about 8 years old, and was from a very, very broken family.
Can you spell that?
Psychological damage is not enough of a term to what he did to his students. So that's the stuff we get into, is that this territory gets murky. We can give you truisms, we can give you ideas, but it gets murky. The other piece that's still coming up for me, and echoing in the back of my head, is when you're talking about caring for others, what do you mean? Are you talking about trying to get them to awaken, trying to get them to do their path?
Yes, more in that sense. Not so much better or help them further on to the day so they can survive to the next, sad moment of their life. No, not that. But the continual improvement of their self to a point where you want them to be where you are. Because having people on that level improves.
I want you to say that sentence again.
Go ahead.
Yeah, that caught me too.
Yeah.
To
Okay.
where
You
are.
want them to be where you are. Who am I talking to?
Good point.
That's far be it from me to say the most egotistical thing I've heard.
Right.
To be
That's
where
a- that's
you
a
are.
And you have a Satanist up here.
Yeah, just saying. I mean, like you were mentioning earlier to me today, that one race, one religion, one person in a war feels, or even us, on a daily basis, we're judging everybody around us, even subconsciously. If they're not like us, they're the other, they're wrong. We want them to think and be like us.
Rephrase that. Be on the open-minded level.
Okay.
Be less.
We're not trying to attack you.
No,
Just so you know.
no. I completely
I
understand
totally
that.
am.
Yeah, well, to dick with me, it's all right. But no, as it is, no, to be, it's not so much to be like the person. It's more to be,
want them to suffer
have the
less.
ability to, suffer less, to be more open to their own world.
Have you just said that? Cut through all the bullshit. What would it be like to sit down in front of them, let your heart break open, tears in your eyes, and say, I can't watch you do this anymore? Not an ultimatum, not a forceful thing, but just saying, I see you struggling. I can offer these helps, but I can't force you. Take your seat, it will not be given to you. Right? Anyone else? We'll come back to you in a minute. Go ahead, dear.
Is there a such thing as trying to be too unique or trying too hard to stand out?
You asked this as that thing dangles from your face.
Don't worry, you're not on camera, we are.
Here's the thing. I don't care if you're into hanging yourself from hooks and spinning around. I don't care if you like having jewelry off your face. You're not unique.
You're probably 100 other people just like you while you're trying to be different. And I'm from the older goth school mentality where I tried to rebel and be different until I walked by a sign at Hot Topic or a little sticker that says, about being different, that everybody, laughs at you and everything. It's like, wait a minute. I'm being different than the majority of the world, but I'm being just like the people who are spitting in the eye of those who are the same. And I thought, So the only way to really get around that question to answer it for you is, as long as you're being true to yourself and happy with who you are and how you're presenting yourself, if that's the inner you coming out, then that's all that matters. Fuck the rest.
Yeah. To me, it's an ego game. I used to be a goth kid. Seriously, long hair, the whole thing. And to me, it's just an ego fucking game. It's me telling myself a story because I want to be special. And here's the problem: if everyone's special, no one is. Anyone see The Incredibles?
Yeah.
If everyone has powers, no one does.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's the point.
But we are all individually exceptional in one way or another because we're unique grains of sand that make up the whole. But it doesn't mean everybody utilizes their full potential. That to me is what's sad. As I'm preaching elitism and the ultimate human being you can be, knowing I'll never get there. But it doesn't stop me from trying. That's what matters.
And I would say is that put away the fucking charade. Like, it's not about being different. What we're all craving, and no one here is gonna fucking admit it, maybe 3 or 4. What everyone really wants, is deep connection, real vulnerable, intimate relationship, no holds barred, absolute connection. And the moment I say this, the ego goes, nope! Nope, that sounds terrible. Right? I need to keep my stories, I need to keep my preferences, I need to keep my specialness.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of wasting so much time in front of the fucking mirror worrying about how unique I am.
Who says you can't have both? Who says you can't truly be who you are on the outside and still reach for that other aspect?
Yeah, I'm not saying these things are bad. I'm just saying is we put a lot of work into telling ourselves a story instead of just fucking taking time to actually connect with people. Stop talking about fucking nameless shit like the weather. What is it like to be you? Right? And then I want to come back to something real quick before I get to that, and this is just real simple. You mentioned this whole care thing, and I was telling Corvus this earlier, and it seems important. I don't use the word hate often. I hate activists. And this is why. It sounds counterculture, I'm a fucking Buddhist, yada yada, environment, yada yada. The reason I don't like activist mindset is the same thing. Activist mindset is I burn myself out, I try to change the world into what I want the world to be.
Who says
Your
you're
ways are
right?
better. Yeah.
Well, no, it's not even the way that it's better or right. We don't even need to get into value judgments.
Okay, no, yeah.
The problem is we get into the thing where we're arguing with fucking reality.
Good point.
It will never conform to your particular flavor of reality. And what you're doing is literally bashing your head against it. I know a guy who was like, oh, we can only live in populations of 150 and houses with no electricity because Dunbar's number says we can't have more than relationships than that. And I was like, that's great for you. Wow. Some of us have other shit to do. Right?
I have a life, see ya.
If you want to do that and see if your cult works, great. I'm not in. So yeah, we just wanted to bring that up.
Yeah. Even
her first.
Her first. I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. No worries, bro.
So I've had a burning question for Corvus, I guess. So about Satanism, where it's focused on the self, and it sounds really great where you should take care of yourself before you can nurture other people, but then the like the worries that those who would take it too far, because like narcissism is just like, it's when you start to use people for the betterment of you. What's sort of built into sort of Satanism to discourage that, or is there?
There is. It's called common sense. It's called responsibility. I mean, you have the extreme of gluttony, and we kind of joke and say that the 7 deadly sins means, well, you're not starving to death because you're eating, but do not be a hedonist where everything's to extremes. Be an Epicurean. That is someone who wants the finer things in life, who truly enjoys the steak versus, something else. You're trying to enjoy the life you have and do as much as you can for yourself, but take nothing to such an extreme that it's harmful to you, because that's stupidity and that's our greatest sin.
So even like harming others is sort of harming yourself.
Of course, it's like I said earlier, I'm not going to be a dick to people because I want them to buy my book so I can pay my rent. So there has to be that common sense balance approach to everything in life, and we really try to do that.
I would add one side thing to that, and this is very simple. Anything you consider selfish, you're wrong. And I don't mean that as an attack. What I mean that is that We live in a culture that's based on a capitalist notion that the only thing that matters is productivity and profit. All of us are grinding our lives away. Think about this. You give up an hour of your life for anywhere between $8 to $20 an hour. An hour of your fucking life.
Put those grains of sand and see your entire life to death. Ooh.
You do this, and then you go home, you deal with your families, you deal with your loved ones, you deal with the very real world we have in, right? And what we do is then we say, oh, suck it up. No one here in this room, myself included, gives themselves enough self-care. We've been programmed to do so is selfish. And what I would say is actually, we have to first get to a place of real self-love and care before we even know what selfish is, because we are so far on the other end of the extreme, because we don't want to look at the systems we're living in, the systems we're part of. Once you get that, once you truly take full responsibility for the world you're in and the effect it has on you, the fact that we are grinding away our lives in this system, then you can start managing and figuring out where self-care and selfishness are different. But until then, if you can hold compassion and you can hold self-care, how could you ever be selfish?
Yeah, this is between when you mentioned Incredibles. You should add X-Men to that, because I felt when I was on my own path, it's like Charles Xavier versus Magneto, or like Martin Luther King or Malcolm X, kind of like that thing. My duality is if I'm gonna be me, even though I have some compassion for the people I care about, but there are times I feel like I have this Magneto streak in me. That's how I feel about it.
Sometimes it's just self-preservation.
That's what I'm talking about.
Sometimes it's the ego wanting to feel righteously strong because it doesn't want to be vulnerable.
It's about understanding the difference and recognizing it by being honest with yourself at that moment.
Being a crusader feels wonderful.
Yeah.
I guarantee every single Christian that went over and killed Muslims during the 7 Crusades absolutely felt super empowered and wonderful.
Yeah,
that's a real thing.
Yeah, the thing is, but you gotta forget that it was, even though it was a time of war, but there was no excuse for it either. That's just my opinion.
And the other side felt exactly the same way. So splitting hairs at that point.
Yeah, especially when it comes to this, it seems like in the 21st century, right around there, it seems like the same deja vu after all this time.
So if you want to bring us to that at the end, we're getting really close.
Sorry about that.
And so, no, you're fine. Get us afterwards. I'd love to talk to you.
Sure.
Everyone, only thing I have to say is thank you for listening to our dribble.
Because that's all it is. You have your own perspective.
If you're interested, my cards are downstairs. I have a flyer for a thing we call a Zazenkai. It's a Zen intensive. It's a one-day practice. It's super cheap, $50. You come, we sit all day. 9 to 7, have a wonderful vegetarian lunch. We do practices such as energy work practices and deep, real Zazen. Do not move. Do not talk. Sit. You can't follow basic dog instructions, we're in trouble. You're in trouble. So if you're interested in those things, come see me or check those things out. Corvus's books are down there. Anything else you want to add?
Most of all, thank you for choosing to spend almost 2 hours with us. We greatly appreciate your questions, and I hope you walk away from this, with something that you take away.
All right, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.